nurse asked for my home address, I froze. I didn't have one. That line still echoes in my mind like a bad dream. I was sitting on a stiff hospital bed, my hands gripping the thin white sheets, the smell of antiseptic sharp in my nose. My contractions were close, my body trembling, but the question hit me harder than any pain in my belly. The nurse, a kind woman with soft eyes, tilted her head. "Ma'am, your home address?" I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat burning. I don't have one right now." Her expression softened immediately, but the pity in her eyes stung worse than the contraction that followed. How did I get here? A woman with a wedding ring still on her finger, giving birth alone. No husband, no family, no home. That night, as rain tapped against the hospital window and thunder rolled somewhere far away, I promised myself I would never forget this feeling. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I never wanted to be this powerless again. Six months earlier, my life had looked completely different. I still remember the smell of pancakes that morning, golden brown, the butter melting just right. I was humming softly in the kitchen of my mother-in-law's house, wearing one of Mark's oversized shirts because most of my clothes were still in boxes. We had just moved in 2 weeks earlier. It wasn't what I'd dreamed of, but it was supposed to be temporary. Mark and I had hit a rough patch financially. His job at the local car dealership had slowed down, and my part-time teaching barely covered gas and groceries. His mother, Linda, offered us her guest room until things got better. Linda lived in a 2-story white house in a quiet part of Dayton, Ohio. Her garden looked like something from a magazine. Every rose trimmed, every petal perfect. She liked things neat, predictable, controlled. At first I thought she was just particular, but it didn't take long to realize. Linda liked control more than anything else. "Emily," she said that morning, standing by the doorway, arms crossed. "You know, when you use the kitchen, try to leave it cleaner than you found it. I spent years keeping this home spotless." Her tone was polite, but sharp underneath, the kind that left tiny cuts in your confidence. I smiled, the kind of smile you give when you're trying not to start something. "Of course, Mrs. Parker. I'm almost done here." She sighed softly. "Linda, you can call me Linda. But really, dear, you might want to use less butter next time. Mark has always had a sensitive stomach." I nodded, biting my tongue. Mark walked in right then, smiling at his mother like nothing was wrong. "Smells amazing in here. Did Mom tell you she used to make pancakes for us every Sunday?" Linda smiled, that same tight little smile she always had when she felt victorious. "Yes, well, some traditions shouldn't be forgotten." That was how life felt there, like I was walking through someone else's traditions. Every morning I made sure to stay out of her way. I cleaned, cooked, did laundry, even watered her plants. And every night I lay beside Mark, reminding myself this was just temporary, that soon we'd save enough to rent our own place and start our real life together. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought things would finally change. I told Mark first, of course. He was shocked, happy, but nervous. His arms wrapped around me, his breath warm against my neck. "We'll figure it out," he whispered. "It's going to be okay." But when we told Linda, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well," she said, folding her napkin neatly, "that's big news. I suppose congratulations are in order." I remember the silence that followed, heavy, like fog. She tapped her fingers against the table. "You know, babies change everything, especially when you don't have your own home." Mark tried to laugh it off. "Mom, we're working on that." "I'm sure you are," she said, her tone sugary sweet. "But let's be realistic. It's not easy raising a child when you can't even afford your own rent." That night, I cried quietly while Mark slept. I told myself it was just hormones, that she didn't mean it like that. But deep down, I knew she was planting something in his mind. Over the next few weeks, little things started to shift. Linda began locking certain cabinets. She started referring to the guest room as the storage room again, like we were temporary tenants. And one morning, when I went to grab my prenatal vitamins, I found my bag moved to the hallway, like a quiet reminder of where I stood in that house. Still, I kept peace. I told myself that if I stayed polite, calm, and grateful, everything would work out. But then, one evening, I overheard something that changed everything. I was walking past the kitchen when I heard Linda's voice, low and serious. "Mark, you need to think about what's best for you. You can't carry someone else's mistakes forever." My heart stopped. Mistakes. She meant me. Mark's voice came next, weary. "Mom, please, not now. She's pregnant." "And that's exactly why I'm saying it now," Linda said. "Do you really think this is the life you wanted? You're barely keeping up as it is." I didn't hear the rest. My ears rang. My eyes burned. I walked quietly back to the guest room, sat on the edge of the bed, and pressed my hand against my stomach. I was carrying life, and yet I'd never felt more unwanted. That night, when Mark came to bed, I didn't say a word. I just turned away and listened to the sound of the rain outside, wondering if he'd defend me when the real test came. I didn't know it then, but that test was coming sooner than I could have imagined. It started with whispers, the kind you pretend not to hear, the kind that make you question if the house you live in is really a home or just a waiting room for heartbreak. A week after that conversation I overheard, Mark began spending longer hours at work. He said the dealership was short-staffed, that he had to pick up extra shifts. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the truth was, he'd started looking at me differently. Not angry, not even cold, just absent. Like he was drifting away quietly while I tried to hold on to a version of us that no longer existed. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in the living room when Linda came in. Her hair was perfectly curled, as always, her perfume strong enough to fill the air before she even spoke. "Oh, you're doing the laundry?" she asked, in that tone that wasn't quite a question, more like a mild disapproval. "Yes," I said softly. "I thought I'd get ahead before Mark comes home." She smiled faintly. "That's very thoughtful. Though between you and me, I always preferred to do Mark's clothes myself. Old habits, you know." I forced a smile. "Of course." She stepped closer and picked up one of Mark's shirts from the folded pile. "You know, Emily, when I was your age, I made sure my husband never had to worry about anything. Not cooking, not cleaning, not money. I just handled it all." It was subtle, but it hurt, the way she said it. Like a reminder that I wasn't enough, like a mother staking her claim on her son, even after he'd built a family of his own. I didn't respond. I just folded the last towel, placed it neatly on the stack, and walked away. But later that night, as I sat in bed waiting for Mark, I could still smell her perfume on his shirt. Faint, floral, invasive. As my belly grew, so did the distance between us. I started noticing that things of mine went missing, small things at first. My lotion from the bathroom, a framed photo from the dresser, my favorite mug from the kitchen. When I asked Linda, she'd smile and say, "Oh, I think I put that away for safekeeping. You know, this house can get so cluttered." Cluttered. That's what she called my things. My life. My space. The morning sickness didn't help. I was constantly exhausted, barely keeping up with my teaching job. Some days when I'd sit at the small desk by the window, planning lessons for my preschoolers, I'd feel my eyes fill with tears for no reason, except there was a reason. I didn't feel like a wife, or a daughter-in-law, or even a person, just an inconvenience, in someone else's home. Then came the night of the baby shower. Or rather, what was supposed to be a baby shower. Linda insisted on planning it herself. "You just relax," she said. "I'll handle everything." At first I was touched. I thought maybe this was her way of extending an olive branch. I imagined a small, cozy gathering, friends, family, laughter. Maybe this was our chance to start over. But when the day came, it wasn't our celebration. It was hers. The decorations were pastel and elegant, but cold. The cake read, "Congratulations, Mark," not "Congratulations, Mark and Emily." And as I looked around the room, I realized that almost no one there was my friend. They were all hers, her church ladies, her neighbors, even the florist she gossiped with every Wednesday. When Linda raised her glass for a toast, she smiled at me across the table. "To my son, Mark, who's about to become a wonderful father. You make us proud, honey." Everyone clapped. No one noticed me blinking away tears as I smiled politely, hands folded over my belly. Later, when I tried to tell Mark how it made me feel, he sighed. "Em, please don't do this. She worked hard on that shower. You're reading too much into it." "Reading too much into it?" I whispered. "Mark, she didn't even mention me in the toast, not once." "She's just traditional," he said, rubbing his forehead. "You know how she is." I stared at him, my chest tightening. "Yeah," I said softly. "I do." The next morning, I woke up early to make coffee, trying to shake off the bitterness. But when I opened the fridge, something caught my eye. A printed folder sitting on the counter, labeled "Rental Agreement, Guest House." Curious, I opened it. Inside were lease documents for the small guest house behind Linda's property. My heart sank when I saw the names. Tenant, Emily Parker. Rent, due, $800 per month. Didn't make sense. The guest house was part of Linda's own land. Why would I rent something that technically belonged to her? That's when she walked in, perfectly timed as always. "Oh, I see you found it," she said, taking the folder gently from my hands. "I was going to show you later. I thought this might be a good way to help you gain some independence." "Independence?" I repeated slowly. "Yes, you know, your own space, your own bills. You'll feel accomplished." She smiled like it was a gift. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her if she'd ever known what it felt like to be 8 months pregnant, with no savings, and a husband who barely looked you in the eye anymore. But I just stood there, frozen. "You want me to pay you rent?" Her eyes softened. "It's just symbolic, dear. You'll still be close by, of course. Mark and I thought it might be best." Mark and I. That phrase broke me more than the idea of the rent itself, because it meant this wasn't her plan alone anymore. He was in on it. That night, when he came to bed, I asked him, quietly, "Did you agree with your mom about the guest house?" He hesitated before answering. "It's just temporary, Em. She's right. It might help us figure things out." "Figure what out?" I said, my voice trembling. "We're married, Mark. We're about to have a baby." He exhaled heavily. "I just think we need some space. You've been emotional lately." Emotional. That word again, like my feelings were some kind of disorder. I turned away, tears soaking into my pillow, because in that moment I realized I was already being pushed out. Slowly, politely, completely. And soon I wouldn't even have a pillow left to cry on. The night I realized what they'd done, it wasn't some big confrontation. There was no shouting, no thrown plates, no dramatic thunderstorm outside, just quiet. That kind of cruel quiet that feels heavier than noise ever could. It was mid-March. I was 37 weeks pregnant. My ankles were swollen, my back ached constantly, and sleep was a distant memory. I'd started packing a small hospital bag. A few baby onesies, a blanket, a photo of Mark and me from our honeymoon. I was clinging to the belief that once the baby came, everything would somehow fall back into place. That's what I told myself, because the truth was too painful to face. Mark had been staying late at work, almost every night that week. I stopped asking questions because every answer hurt worse than silence. That evening, I went into the kitchen to heat up some soup. The house was dark except for the warm glow from the stove. I heard soft voices coming from the back porch, Linda's and Mark's. At first, I didn't mean to listen, but my name came up, and that's when my heart started pounding. "She's not stable, Mom," Mark whispered. "I can't take this anymore." "Sweetheart," Linda replied, her voice calm and soothing. "You've done your part. You've been patient. But this house can't be a daycare. You have to think about your future." I don't know where she'll go," he said. There was a pause, then Linda sighed, the kind of sigh that said she'd already made peace with her decision. "She's a grown woman," she said, "and once that baby's here, she'll figure it out. I've arranged everything. The movers will be here next week. The lease is ready. She'll be fine. Next week." It took me a moment to process what I was hearing. I remember gripping the edge of the counter so tightly my knuckles turned white. The soup began to boil over and I jumped, startled by the hiss of the burner. The voices stopped. "Emily?" Linda called from the porch. I turned off the stove and wiped my eyes quickly, pretending to look busy. "Dinner smells nice," she said as she stepped inside. Her lipstick was perfect, not a hair out of place. She moved through the room like a woman who owned every inch of it. "You okay, dear? You look pale." I forced a smile. "Just tired." She patted my arm gently. "Well, get some rest. You'll need your strength for the move." I looked up. "The what?" Her smile didn't waver. "Oh, I assumed Mark told you. We've decided it's best you move into the guest house now. It's all ready. I even had the nursery painted." "Painted?" I whispered. You already did that." "Of course," she said. "I'm very thorough." And then she walked away, humming, like she hadn't just torn the ground out from under me. That night, I waited for Mark. He didn't come home. When the clock hit midnight, I sat on the edge of the bed, one hand on my belly, trying to breathe through the ache that had nothing to do with pregnancy. At 2 a.m., I heard a car pull into the driveway. Mark came in quietly, smelling of beer and cigarette smoke, even though he didn't smoke. "Where were you?" I asked. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. "Out," he said flatly, unbuttoning his shirt. "Your mom told me about the move," I said. "Why didn't you tell me yourself?" He froze, then sighed heavily. "I didn't want to fight, Em." "Fight?" I said, standing up. "You're moving me into a guest house like I'm some tenant and you think I wouldn't notice?" "It's not like that," he said, avoiding my eyes. "It's just temporary." "Stop calling it temporary," I snapped. "You're kicking me out, Mark. You and your mother." "Don't bring her into this," he shouted suddenly, his voice cutting through the room like glass. I flinched. "She's just trying to help," he said, softer now, but the damage was already done. I felt my breath catch, that quiet moment before the tears fall, before the world shifts and never quite goes back. "I'm your wife," I whispered. "Doesn't that mean anything to you?" He rubbed his face, exhaling sharply. "It's complicated." "No, it's not," I said. "It's cruel." He didn't answer. He just turned off the light and got into bed. I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between each shallow breath. A few days later, Linda's plan unfolded like clockwork. I came home from a prenatal appointment to find boxes lined up in the hallway. My clothes, my books, my teaching supplies, all neatly labeled with sticky notes in her careful handwriting. Guest house, closet. Guest house, kitchen. Guest house, misc. Mark wasn't home. Linda stood at the top of the stairs, her arms crossed. You should be grateful, Emily. Most women don't get this kind of help. Help? I said quietly. You're throwing me out, she smiled. I'm rearranging. There's a difference. The movers arrived the next morning. I didn't even have the energy to fight. I followed them numbly as they carried my things across the yard to the small one-bedroom guest house that smelled of paint and dust. When the last box was set down, Linda handed me an envelope. Inside was a set of keys and a contract. Rent is due on the 1st, she said matter-of-factly. Utilities are separate. I'll give you a copy of the rules later. Rules. I wanted to ask her if one of those rules included having a heart, but I was too tired, too pregnant, and too broken to care. That night, I sat on the floor surrounded by boxes, the baby kicking softly inside me. The loneliness was unbearable, not just because I was alone, but because I was abandoned. Every movement in my belly was a reminder that I was still responsible for someone, that I couldn't fall apart completely. So I started writing in a little notebook I kept by my bed. Just small things, what I ate, how I felt, every insult Linda had thrown my way. I didn't know why I was doing it. Maybe it was my way of proving to myself that I existed, that my pain was real. 2 weeks later, it happened. A storm rolled through late one night, rain hammering the roof, wind shaking the windows. I felt a sharp pain in my lower back, deep, rhythmic, terrifying. I grabbed my phone and called Mark. No answer. I tried Linda's number next. She picked up on the second ring. Linda, I gasped. I think it's time. The baby's coming. There was a pause. Then, in that same calm tone, she said, You should call an ambulance, Emily. I'm not comfortable driving in this weather. And she hung up. I sat there, phone in hand, tears streaming down my face as another contraction hit. Outside, thunder roared. Inside, I realized something even louder. I was truly on my own. The contractions came faster than I expected. At first, they felt like waves, strong, but manageable. Then they became storms, crashing through me without mercy. I sat on the cold floor of that tiny guest house, clutching my belly, breathing through the pain. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. I could barely hear myself think. I tried calling Mark again, straight to voicemail. I screamed his name once, just once, like maybe he'd somehow hear me through the rain, through the guilt I hoped still lived somewhere inside him. But there was nothing. By the time I called 911, I could hardly speak. The dispatcher's calm voice guided me through every contraction. Stay on the line with me, ma'am. Help is on the way. I remember the flashing lights reflecting off the wet pavement, the paramedics bursting through the door. One of them knelt beside me, his face soft with concern. Hang in there, sweetheart. We've got you. They lifted me onto a stretcher, wrapped me in a blanket, and carried me into the ambulance. As the siren wailed, I stared out the window, past the rain, past the house that wasn't home anymore, and whispered to my baby, It's okay. We're gonna make it. When I woke up, I was in a hospital room. Everything smelled like antiseptic and rain. My throat was dry, my body heavy and sore. Then I heard it. The softest sound, like the world had paused just to let me listen. A baby's cry. My baby's cry. A nurse came in, smiling. Congratulations, Mommy. It's a girl. She placed her in my arms, this tiny, perfect miracle with dark hair and the smallest fingers I'd ever seen. My chest ached, but in the best way. I cried so hard I could barely breathe. I named her Grace, because that's what she was. Undeserved kindness in the middle of cruelty. Mark showed up the next morning. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair uncombed. He stood awkwardly near the door, holding a small bouquet of supermarket flowers. I came as soon as I could, he said softly. I didn't answer. He stepped closer, looking down at Grace. She's beautiful. She is, I said, my voice flat. He sat down in the chair beside me. I'm sorry about the other night. Mom she panicked. She didn't mean for things to... I cut him off. Stop. He blinked, surprised. Don't protect her, Mark. Not now. He looked at his hands. You don't understand what it's like. I understand exactly what it's like, I said, my voice trembling. It's like begging for love that never comes. It's like being married to someone who disappears every time I need him. The silence between us was thick. Grace stirred slightly in my arms. I rocked her gently, eyes fixed on the little pink hat covering her head. I called you, I said quietly. While I was in labor, you didn't answer. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I laughed bitterly. You know who did? A stranger. A man whose name I don't even know. He's the one who showed up. Not you, not your mother, a stranger. Tears welled in his eyes, but I didn't care anymore. When the nurse came in, I turned away. I'd like to rest, I said. Mark hesitated, then nodded and left. I didn't see him again for 2 days. The hospital was strangely peaceful. For the first time in months, I felt safe. The nurses were kind. They helped me feed Grace, taught me how to swaddle her, checked on me through the night. But every time visiting hours ended, I felt the ache of uncertainty creeping back in. I didn't know where I'd go once they discharged me. The guest house still smelled of paint and loneliness. The main house, Linda's house, wasn't an option. I had nowhere. On the 3rd morning, a familiar voice broke through my thoughts. Emily? I looked up. It was Nora, my childhood friend. We hadn't spoken in nearly a year. She rushed to my side, hugging me gently so as not to disturb Grace, who was asleep in the bassinet. Oh, Em, she whispered, tears in her eyes. You look exhausted. I feel worse, I admitted, trying to laugh. She glanced around the room, her expression softening when she saw Grace. She's perfect. I nodded. She's all I have left. Nora pulled a chair closer. You have me, she said firmly, and my spare room. I froze. Nora, I can't. Yes, you can, she interrupted. I won't take no for an answer. You and that little girl are coming home with me. For the first time in weeks, I felt something stir inside me. Not joy exactly, but something close. Hope. 2 days later, I was discharged. Nora helped me pack the few things I had. A diaper bag, some baby clothes, and a small stack of papers from the hospital. When we pulled into her driveway, the sight of her cozy little home, the porch lights, the smell of coffee from the kitchen made me want to cry all over again. This isn't forever, I told her, even though I had no idea what forever looked like anymore. I know, she said, but it's a start. That night, after feeding Grace and tucking her into the crib Nora had borrowed from her sister, I sat on the couch and stared at the rain outside. For months, I'd been living in other people's homes, bending, shrinking, trying to fit into spaces that were never really mine. But this was different. For the first time, I was somewhere I was wanted, and as I held Grace against my chest, her tiny breaths warm against my skin, I made a silent promise. I would never let anyone make us feel homeless again. The next morning, as the sun rose over the damp streets, I checked my phone for the first time in days. 21 missed calls from Mark, 6 from Linda. I deleted them all. But one text caught my eye, from an unknown number. It was a photo. Linda's house, my boxes, all of them piled by the curb, and beneath it, a single message, "Your things are ready for pickup." I didn't cry this time. I didn't even reply, because in that moment, I knew something they didn't. They'd taken my home, but not my strength, and soon I would get both back, in ways they never saw coming. The days after Grace and I moved in with Nora blurred together in soft colors, white curtains, the smell of coffee, baby powder, and exhaustion. Nora worked from home, so she'd often peek into the nursery just to check if I was okay. "You're healing," she'd remind me whenever she saw that distant look in my eyes. It's going to take time. She was right. But healing wasn't a straight line. Some nights I'd wake up at 3 a.m. to feed Grace, and while she drifted back to sleep, I'd sit there in the dark, scrolling through old photos on my phone. Mark smiling, Linda hugging me during our wedding reception, me believing that this was forever. Now those smiles felt like ghosts. A week later, Mark finally reached out again. This time, he didn't call. He showed up. I was standing on the porch, rocking Grace, when Nora came out from the kitchen whispering, "Emily, there's someone here for you." I looked up, and there he was. Mark. He looked thinner, his face unshaven, his shirt wrinkled like he'd slept in his car. "Can we talk?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. The sound of Grace cooing in my arms felt louder than his voice. After a long pause, I nodded toward the porch steps. 5 minutes. He sat down beside me, fidgeting with his wedding ring. "Mom feels terrible," he began. I laughed softly, bitterly. Does she? Or does she just hate how it looks to everyone else? "She didn't mean to throw you out like that, Em." She panicked. I should have stopped her. "You didn't, though," I said flatly. He sighed, eyes welling up. "I was scared, okay? You don't know what it's like living with her when she gets angry. She breaks things, says awful stuff. You thought it was easier to let her ruin my life than stand up to her." He winced, then whispered, "I made a mistake." I looked down at Grace. "No, Mark, you made a choice." The silence after that was heavier than any scream could have been. He visited again a few days later, this time with groceries and baby formula. Nora wasn't home, and I almost didn't let him in, but Grace needed the milk, and part of me, the part still clinging to old memories, wanted to believe he meant well. He placed the bags on the table and stood there awkwardly. "I can help you know. I can take her for a few hours, give you a break." I shook my head. "Not yet. Emily, I'm her father." I met his eyes. "Then act like it." He swallowed hard and left without another word. That night, I wrote everything down in a notebook. Every date, every word, every call I didn't return. I didn't know why, but something told me I might need it someday. Weeks turned into months. Grace grew stronger. She started smiling, then giggling. Her laughter filled Nora's little house like sunlight. And me? I started working again, just part-time at a local daycare, but it felt like freedom, like I was slowly reclaiming pieces of myself I'd forgotten existed. The other teachers adored Grace. They called her the Sunshine Baby. Every time I looked at her, I felt proud, not just because she was mine, but because she survived all the storms I didn't think I could. Then one morning I got an unexpected call. "Mrs. Parker?" a man's voice asked. "This is Attorney Green. I'm calling on behalf of Linda Parker." My stomach tightened. "What does she want?" "She's filed a petition for grandparent visitation rights." For a moment I couldn't breathe. What? "She claims you're keeping the child from her. She's requesting court-mandated access." I felt the blood drain from my face. She kicked me out while I was in labor. She didn't even come to the hospital. "I understand, ma'am," he said gently. "But legally, she's still the child's grandmother. I'd recommend seeking representation." When I hung up, my hands were shaking. This wasn't over. Not even close. That night, Nora found me sitting on the kitchen floor, the phone still in my lap. "Em, what happened?" I told her everything. By the time I finished, she looked furious. "She's unbelievable. She abuses you, kicks you out, ignores your baby's birth, and now she wants visitation." I nodded, fighting tears. "I can't go through court, Nora. I can't face her again." "Yes, you can," she said firmly, "and you will. Not just for you, for Grace." Her words hit hard. She was right, so I reached out to a women's legal aid center the next morning. They listened, really listened, and agreed to take my case pro bono. For the first time, someone was standing with me. When the court hearing came, Linda sat on the opposite side of the room. Pearl necklace, perfect hair, fake tears. Mark sat behind her, avoiding my eyes. When the judge asked me to speak, my voice trembled at first. But then I looked at Grace, asleep in her stroller, and everything inside me steadied. "Your Honor," I began softly, "I'm not keeping anyone from my child. I'm protecting her." I told the truth about being thrown out in labor, about the calls ignored, the humiliation, the loneliness. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't need to. The truth was enough. By the time I finished, the room was silent. Linda's expression cracked for the first time. The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Parker, I find your actions deeply concerning. This petition is denied. In fact, I advise you to seek counseling before any future contact is considered." Linda's face turned pale. I exhaled, a long, shaking breath that felt like years of pain leaving my body. After court, Mark caught up with me in the hallway. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything." I nodded. "I know. Can I see Grace sometime?" I thought for a long moment, then said quietly, "Maybe, but not until you stop being your mother's son and start being her father." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I understand." I believed he did. That night back at Nora's, I held Grace close as she drifted off to sleep. The world outside was still messy. My heart was still healing. But in that moment, surrounded by quiet, by peace, I realized something. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need validation. I just needed this, the calm after the storm. Grace stirred in her sleep, a tiny smile curving her lips. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled too, because we weren't victims anymore. We were survivors. 3 years passed. That sounds simple when you say it out loud, 3 years, but living them felt like climbing out of a collapsed building one stone at a time. Grace was now 3, bright and curious, with her father's hazel eyes and my stubborn curls. Every morning she woke me by pressing her tiny palms against my cheeks and whispering, "Mommy, wake up, sunshine's here." And she was right. Every day felt like sunlight after a storm. We lived in a small rented house now, nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, 1 creaky porch swing, and a garden that bloomed with wildflowers Grace and I planted ourselves. The air smelled of coffee and hope. After everything, I had started something new, a small home daycare called Little Steps Learning. It began with just 2 kids from the neighborhood and grew, word by word, mother to mother. I used to think my past would follow me forever, but now I realized it had shaped me into someone stronger, someone who could comfort other mothers who came in with stories of loss, fear, or starting over. Sometimes, while watching the kids build block towers or chase bubbles in the yard, I'd think about the day I gave birth, homeless, terrified, broken, and wonder how that same woman found her way here. The answer always came softly, because she had to. One cool autumn afternoon, as the leaves outside turned the color of rust and honey, I was packing up toys when I heard a knock at the door. It was Mark. For a moment I just stared. He looked different, older, calmer somehow. The lines around his eyes had deepened, but there was humility in them now, not fear. "Hey," he said gently. "I called first. You said it was okay to come by." I nodded, stepping aside. "Yeah, come in." Grace peeked from behind my leg. "Daddy?" Her voice was uncertain. She knew him only from occasional calls and short park visits over the last year. Mark smiled softly, kneeling down. "Hey, Bug, you've gotten so big." She giggled shyly, then darted away toward her toy box. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one I'd found secondhand years ago. He glanced around the house, the drawings taped to the fridge, the little shoes by the door. "This is a beautiful place, Em," he said quietly. "You've built something real." I poured him coffee and smiled faintly. It's peaceful. That's all I wanted. He nodded. I know I don't deserve to say this, but I'm proud of you. That caught me off guard. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. Thank you, I finally whispered. We sat there in silence for a while, both listening to Grace humming to herself in the next room. Then Mark looked down, fiddling with his mug. Mom's not doing well. The words hit the air like a stone dropped in water. She's been sick. Cancer. It's spread. I froze, my hands tightening around my cup. She keeps asking about you, about Grace. She's been different lately, softer. I looked away, my mind spinning with years of memories, the cold eyes, the cutting remarks, the day she made me walk out that door while my body begged for mercy. And yet, beneath all that pain, something stirred. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something gentler. Does she want to see us? I asked quietly. He nodded. She says she just wants to apologize. Once, in person. I didn't answer right away. I stared out the window, watching leaves fall, one after another, like moments you can never get back. Finally, I said, all right, but it'll be on my terms. 2 weeks later, we drove to Linda's house, the same white 2-story I once called home. It looked smaller now, somehow lonelier. Linda sat by the window in a blanket shawl, thinner than I remembered. Her hair had gone gray, and her eyes, once so sharp, were tired, like she'd been fighting a war within herself. When she saw Grace, she began to cry. Oh, she's beautiful, she whispered, reaching out with trembling hands, just like her mother. Grace looked at me, unsure. I nodded, and she stepped forward cautiously. Linda took her tiny hand, tears slipping down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice cracking, for everything I did, for how I treated you, for what I made my son become. I stood there, silent, the smell of old lavender filling the room. You don't have to forgive me, she continued. I just needed to say it before it's too late. I swallowed hard. My chest ached, not from anger, but from the weight of everything unsaid over the years. I stepped closer. You hurt me, Linda, more than you probably realize. But I believe you're sorry, and that matters. Her eyes filled with fresh tears. Can you ever forgive me? I looked at Grace, innocent, unburdened, and said softly, maybe not today, but I'll try. Linda nodded, a faint, grateful smile trembling on her lips. That's all I can ask. For a long time, none of us spoke. Grace climbed onto her lap and began showing her a stuffed bunny, like children do, unaware of the healing happening in the silence. And in that stillness, something in me unclenched. A part of my heart I hadn't realized was still holding on. Linda passed away a few months later. Mark called to tell me she went peacefully. We attended her funeral, quiet, simple, with just a few family members and old friends. When it was over, Mark and I stood side by side under the gray sky. She wasn't all bad, he said softly. I nodded. None of us are. He smiled faintly. You're stronger than anyone I know. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and realized I wasn't angry anymore. You're learning too, I said. That counts. He chuckled softly. Maybe someday we'll both get it right. Maybe, I said, but for now, we're okay. That night, after Grace fell asleep, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and the cool autumn wind brushing against my skin. The porch light flickered softly, and somewhere far off, a train hummed through the dark. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one crying on a hospital bed with nowhere to go. And then I thought about the woman I'd become, independent, calm, whole. I smiled to myself, because the greatest revenge wasn't anger, it was peace. And peace, I had learned, was the home no one could ever take from me again. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who teach us our strength. I used to think forgiveness meant letting someone back in, but now I know. It simply means setting yourself free. If you believe that peace is the strongest revenge, don't forget to follow and share my story. Chat po sa ano.